The air in our home had been thick with unspoken words for months, a silent, suffocating blanket I pretended not to notice. But the moment I saw the resort brochure tucked carelessly beneath a stack of his business papers, everything crystallized. It wasn't the glossy pictures of infinity pools or the promise of sun-drenched beaches that caught my eye. It was the name of the resort, a place I knew intimately, a place he'd often joked about as too cliché for us. And then, the dates. They perfectly coincided with the business trip he'd been planning for weeks, the one he insisted I couldn't join. My breath hitched, not in a dramatic gasp, but a quiet, internal shudder that felt like ice water in my veins. My husband, the man who swore he adored me, who built a life with me brick by meticulously placed brick, was planning a secret getaway. And I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic and went straight to the gut, that I wasn't going to be his companion. A cold dread settled over me, heavy and unyielding. It wasn't just a trip. It was a betrayal, the kind that unravels years of trust in a single, devastating moment. I picked up the brochure, my fingers tracing the elegant script of the resort's logo. The azure serenity. How fitting. A place of peace, of escape, for him. And for me, a battlefield. My mind raced, trying to find an innocent explanation. A surprise for me? No, he was a terrible liar, and his recent evasiveness, the hushed phone calls, the sudden late nights at the office, all pointed to something far more insidious. He'd been distant, yes, but I'd attributed it to work stress, to the usual ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. I'd even tried harder, cooking his favorite meals, planning quiet evenings, hoping to bridge the growing chasm between us. Now I saw it wasn't a chasm. It was a deliberate, calculated distance he was creating. The anger came swiftly, a hot, searing wave that threatened to consume me. But beneath it, a deeper, more chilling emotion took root, a profound sense of injustice. I had poured my entire being into our life together. I had supported his ambitions, celebrated his triumphs, nursed him through his failures. I had been his rock, his confidant, his biggest cheerleader. And this was my reward? A secret trip to a cliché resort with someone else. The thought alone was a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and hollow. I walked to the window, staring out at the familiar street, but seeing nothing. My reflection stared back, a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes were wide, a mixture of hurt and a nascent, dangerous resolve. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing a scene from a poorly written play. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be the man I married. But the brochure, crisp and real in my hand, begged to differ. The immediate question wasn't, who? I already had a sickening suspicion. It was why. Why now? Why this blatant disregard for everything we had built? The answer, I knew, wouldn't be simple, and it certainly wouldn't be satisfying. It would be a messy tangle of selfishness, cowardice, and a profound lack of respect, and I wasn't going to let it stand. Not quietly, not gracefully. My mind, usually prone to overthinking, became remarkably clear. There was no room for tears, not yet. There was only the cold, hard logic of strategy. If he was going to play this game, I would play it better. I would play it on my terms, and I would win. The initial shock gave way to a simmering fury, a quiet determination that felt almost alien to me. I was not a woman who sought confrontation, but I was also not a woman who would be walked over. Not anymore. I thought of the subtle shifts in his behavior over the past few months, the way he'd started leaving his phone face down, the sudden need for privacy in conversations, the almost imperceptible flinches when I'd touched his arm unexpectedly. I'd dismissed them as paranoia, as the everyday anxieties of a busy wife. How foolish I had been. How utterly, painfully naive. He wasn't just hiding something. He was hiding someone. And that someone, I was almost certain, was a ghost from his past. A woman who had always lingered on the periphery of our lives. A shadow I had foolishly believed was harmless. The resort, the dates, the business trip lie. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. He wasn't just having an affair, he was flaunting it, or at least he thought he was. He thought he was clever, discreet, but he had underestimated me. He had underestimated the quiet woman who paid attention, who noticed the smallest details, who felt the subtle shifts in the emotional landscape of her own home. A bitter laugh escaped me, a sound devoid of humor. He was going to that resort for serenity, for a romantic escape. I would go for justice, and I would bring a very special guest. The thought of it, the sheer audacity of my nascent plan, sent a shiver down my spine that was half fear, half exhilaration. This wasn't just about catching him. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my agency. It was about showing him, and whoever he was with, that I was not a pawn in their sordid little game. I was the queen, and I was about to make my move. The clock had started ticking, and they had no idea what was coming. The injustice of it all fueled my resolve. I had given him my youth, my dreams, my unwavering loyalty. I had built a home, a life, a future with him, and he was casually dismantling it, piece by piece behind my back. The thought of his smug face, his practiced lies, ignited a fire within me. No, he wouldn't get away with it. Not like this. Not without consequences that would echo long after the tan lines faded. My heart ached, a deep, bruising pain, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, unyielding determination. The game was on. The initial shock of the resort brochure slowly morphed into a chilling clarity. It wasn't just a trip. It was a symbol. A blatant disregard for everything I had poured into our marriage. I thought back to the early days, the sacrifices I'd made. I'd put my own career aspirations on hold, subtly at first, then more overtly, to support his burgeoning business. I'd managed our home, handled the finances, even became an amateur therapist for his endless work anxieties. I was the silent partner, the foundation upon which his success was built. And now I was being discarded, like a worn-out tool. I gave them everything, and they discarded me like nothing. The words echoed in my mind, a bitter mantra. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to mock me, a constant reminder of the domesticity I had so carefully cultivated. I remembered countless evenings spent listening to him complain about his colleagues, his clients, his endless struggles. I'd offered advice, comfort, a listening ear, always, and he'd soaked it all up, like a sponge, leaving me feeling drained, yet somehow fulfilled by my role as his indispensable support system. How foolish that fulfillment seemed now. The gaslighting had been insidious, a slow erosion of my self-trust. Whenever I'd gently questioned his late nights, his sudden need for space, he'd turn it around. "You're being paranoid, darling. Don't you trust me? It's just work. You know how demanding my boss is." Or, "You're imagining things. Maybe you're just tired." His voice, so calm and reassuring, had always managed to quell my nascent suspicions, making me feel irrational, even guilty for doubting him. He was a master of deflection, a magician of misdirection, and I, the willing audience, had fallen for every trick. The silence of those who should have defended me was perhaps the most painful part. Our parents, his siblings, even some of our mutual friends, they all saw him as the golden boy, the successful entrepreneur, the devoted husband. They'd never seen the subtle shifts, the way his eyes would glaze over when I spoke about my day, the casual dismissiveness of my opinions, the slow withdrawal of affection. Or maybe they did see and chose to ignore it, preferring the comfortable narrative of a perfect couple. I was invisible to them, a background character in his grand production. I thought of his ex-girlfriend. Let's call her the ghost of his past. She'd resurfaced subtly over the last year, first as a LinkedIn connection, then a casual mention at a dinner party. "Oh, I ran into her, she's doing well." Then a professional lunch. I'd tried to be understanding, even welcoming. "It's good to keep old friends," I'd told him, forcing a smile. He'd praised my maturity, my understanding nature. All the while he was weaving a web of deceit, using my very virtues against me. The thought made my stomach churn. The humiliation was a slow burn, not a sudden explosion. It was the realization that I had been played for a fool, not just by him, but by the entire situation. I had been so invested in the illusion of our perfect life, so desperate for his approval, for the stability he represented, that I had overlooked every glaring red flag. My pride, usually a quiet companion, was now screaming in protest. I remembered a conversation with his mother a few months ago. I'd mentioned how tired I was, how much I wished he'd help more around the house, or just spend more quality time. She'd patted my hand, her eyes full of what I now recognized as pity, not sympathy. "He's a busy man, dear. You know how important his work is. A good wife supports her husband no matter what." Her words, delivered with a saccharine smile, had felt like a subtle reprimand, a reinforcement of the tradition that I was merely an extension of him, my needs secondary. That conversation, more than anything, highlighted my isolation. There was no one in his circle who would ever truly take my side. The tension in the air around me was palpable, even when I was alone. It was the tension of a spring coiling tighter and tighter, ready to snap. I felt a strange mix of powerlessness and a burgeoning, dangerous strength. The powerlessness came from the betrayal itself, the feeling of having my world crumble. The strength came from the realization that I was the only one who could pick up the pieces, and perhaps rearrange them in a way that would shock them all. I started to observe him with a new clinical eye. His phone habits, his schedule, the way he dressed for business meetings. I noticed a new cologne, a subtle change in his grooming. Small details, easily dismissed before, now screamed affair. The casual way he'd leave his laptop open, only to quickly close it when I entered the room. The sudden interest in his appearance, which he'd always been so indifferent about. It was all there, laid out like a map of his deception, and I had been too blind or too trusting to see it. The feeling of being underestimated, intellectually and emotionally, began to fester. He saw me as the dutiful wife, perhaps a little naive, easily manipulated. He thought I would cry, scream, maybe even beg. He thought I would crumble, but he was wrong. The pain, sharp and constant, was slowly hardening into something else entirely. Resolve. A cold, unyielding resolve. The desire for recognition, for him to see my worth, had always been a quiet ache in my heart. I'd wanted him to acknowledge my contributions, my sacrifices, my intelligence. But he never did. He took it all for granted, a given. And now, that desperate longing had transmuted into a fierce need for justice. Not for recognition from him, but for vindication for myself. The thought of him and her, together at that resort, laughing, perhaps even sharing intimate moments, was a torment. It was a picture of betrayal painted in vivid, agonizing colors. But instead of breaking me, it fueled me. It solidified my purpose. I would not be the weeping wife, the discarded woman. I would be the architect of my own justice. And they would never see it coming. The stage was set, the players were in position. All that was left was for me to make my grand entrance. The silence, the humiliation, the gaslighting. It had all been a training ground. And I was ready for the main event. The initial storm of emotions, the shock, the anger, the profound sense of injustice, began to recede, leaving behind a vast, empty space that quickly filled with a cold, strategic calm. I didn't explode. There were no dramatic confrontations, no tearful accusations. Instead, I began to prepare, silently, meticulously. The pain, once a crippling weight, was slowly, almost imperceptibly, turning into a sharpened blade. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about surgical precision, about dismantling their carefully constructed lie with the truth. My first move was to confirm my suspicions beyond a shadow of a doubt. I didn't snoop in his phone. That was too crude, too easily dismissed. Instead, I used the subtle clues he'd left behind. The resort's name, the dates. A quick anonymous call to the resort confirmed a reservation under his name, for two, for the exact dates of his business trip. The confirmation, delivered in a chipper, unsuspecting voice, felt like a hammer blow. Yet it also solidified my resolve. Now, I had concrete evidence. The next step was the most audacious, the most pivotal. I needed an ally, someone equally invested in exposing the truth. And I knew exactly who that person was. the ghost of his past's husband. Let's call him the unexpected ally. I had met him a few times at social gatherings, a quiet, observant man with a dry wit and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had always struck me as a man of integrity, a stark contrast to the deceit I was now facing. Finding his contact information wasn't difficult. A quick search through old event photos, a mutual friend's social media. I drafted a message, then deleted it, then drafted another. It had to be perfect, concise, and compelling, without revealing too much, yet enough to pique his interest. I believe our spouses are planning a trip together to the Azure Serenity Resort on dates. I have reason to believe it's not a business trip. I'd like to discuss this with you, in person, and discreetly. I sent it, my finger hovering over the send button, a tremor running through me. It was a leap of faith, a gamble on a stranger's integrity. His reply came within hours. When and where. No questions, no judgment, just a quiet readiness. We met at a discreet coffee shop, miles from our usual haunts. He listened, his face a mask of controlled emotion, as I laid out the facts. The brochure, the dates, my husband's evasiveness, the ghost of his past's sudden re-emergence in our social circle. When I finished, he simply nodded. "I've noticed things too," he said, his voice low. "The late nights, the secrecy. I just didn't want to believe it." His pain was palpable, a mirror of my own. But like me, he was calm, collected. This wasn't a man who would break down. He was a man who would strategize. It turned out, he was even more prepared than I was. He had been quietly documenting his wife's suspicious activities for months. A silent dossier of phone records, credit card statements, and even a GPS tracker he'd discreetly placed in her car. He showed me printouts, dates, times, locations. It was a damning collection of evidence, far more comprehensive than anything I could have gathered on my own. "I wanted to be sure," he explained, his jaw tight. "I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But this leaves no doubt." My mind raced. This was more than just catching them. This was about exposing a pattern of deceit, a calculated betrayal. "We go to the resort," I stated, my voice firm. "Together. We catch them in the act, and we bring everything you have." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then a slow, grim smile. "I like your style," he said. "Consider me your co-conspirator." The plan began to take shape. We would book a room at the same resort, arriving just as they were settling in. We would observe, gather final confirmation, and then, at the opportune moment, make our grand entrance. The acid humor surfaced in my mind as I imagined their faces. The sheer audacity of it, the poetic justice. "We're not going for a vacation," I told him, a wry smile playing on my lips. "We're going for a performance, and they're the unwitting stars." The something done years ago twist wasn't a hidden asset or a secret clause. It was my own quiet cultivation of a network, my attention to detail, my refusal to be a passive observer in my own life. I had always been the one who remembered birthdays, who sent thoughtful gifts, who maintained connections even when my husband was too busy. This unexpected ally was a testament to that, a connection I had fostered without any ulterior motive, which now proved to be invaluable. My emotional intelligence, often dismissed as sensitivity, became my greatest asset. I could read people, understand their motivations, and predict their reactions. This wasn't just about anger. It was about leveraging every ounce of my quiet strength. As the day of departure approached, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and a profound sense of calm. There was no hesitation, no self-doubt. The pain had been transmuted into a laser-like focus. I packed a single, elegant outfit, a dress that exuded quiet confidence. This wasn't a trip of despair. It was a mission. And I was ready. The suspense was almost unbearable, a thrilling hum beneath my skin. They thought they were escaping to paradise. They were walking straight into a meticulously laid trap. And I, the invisible wife, the underestimated woman, was holding the key. The drive to the Azure Serenity was a surreal experience. The unexpected ally, cool and composed beside me, navigated the winding coastal roads while I stared out the window, a silent movie of our lives playing in my head. The air hummed with anticipation, a tension so thick you could almost taste it. We arrived in the late afternoon, the golden hour painting the resort in a deceptive glow of tranquility. It looked exactly like the brochure, a picture of idyllic escape. For them, perhaps. For us, it was the setting for a reckoning. We checked in discreetly, our faces carefully neutral. Our room, ironically, was just a few doors down from theirs. The unexpected ally had managed to get their room number through a friendly chat with a concierge earlier that day, a testament to his quiet efficiency. We settled in, not unpacking, but preparing. My heart pounded, a drumbeat against my ribs, but my hands were steady as I reviewed the evidence we had compiled. The printouts of their shared messages, the resort booking confirmation, the credit card statements showing lavish dinners and gifts. It was a dossier of deceit, meticulously assembled. We waited. The plan was to let them get comfortable, to allow their guard to drop. We ordered room service, pretending a semblance of normalcy, but every nerve ending was alert. Around 8 p.m. we saw them. They emerged from their room, laughing, his arm casually around her waist. She looked radiant, dressed in a flowing silk dress, her hair perfectly styled. He, my husband, looked younger, lighter, a man unburdened by conscience. The sight was a searing brand on my soul, but I held it together. This was the moment. We followed them to the resort's upscale restaurant, a place with soft lighting and hushed conversations. They chose a table by the window, oblivious to the two figures who quietly took a table in the corner, partially obscured by a large potted palm. We watched them, a macabre dinner theater. They ordered champagne, toasted each other, their eyes sparkling with a shared secret. My unexpected ally's jaw was clenched, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on his wife. Then, the moment arrived. I caught the eye of a waiter, a young man who had served us earlier. I slipped him a folded note and a generous tip. The note contained a simple request. Please deliver this to the gentleman at table 7. Table 7 was theirs. The note was a single, innocuous sentence. The show is about to begin. Your audience awaits. No names, no accusations, just a chilling promise. The waiter approached their table. My husband, mid-laugh, took the note. His smile faltered as he read it. His eyes darted around the room, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Then he saw us. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in dawning horror. The ghost of his past, following his gaze, turned slowly. Her face, moments ago radiant with illicit joy, drained of all color. Her champagne glass clattered against the table, spilling its contents. I rose from my seat, my unexpected ally beside me. We walked towards their table, not rushing, but with a deliberate, measured pace. Every step was a reclamation of my dignity, a stride towards justice. The restaurant? Moments ago, a murmur of polite conversation seemed to fall silent. All eyes were on us. Good evening, I said, my voice calm, almost conversational, a stark contrast to the earthquake raging inside me. Fancy meeting you here? My husband stammered. Well, what are you doing here? This is a business trip. He was still clinging to the lie, even as it crumbled around him. Oh, I know, I replied, a hint of acid humor in my tone. A very important business trip, apparently, one that required 2 rooms, champagne, and a complete disregard for your marital vows. I placed the neatly organized dossier on their table, the stack of papers a silent, damning testament. Funny, I thought business trips usually involved, well, business. Not this. I gestured vaguely at their intertwined hands, which they now quickly pulled apart. The ghost of his past found her voice, a high-pitched, desperate whisper. This is a misunderstanding. We were just catching up. My unexpected ally stepped forward, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Catching up? With my wife in a private suite at a romantic resort? I think we have a very clear understanding, don't we, darling? He pulled out his own set of printouts, a thick stack of phone records and financial statements. These are your catch-up sessions, aren't they? The ones you claimed were girls' nights out, or late meetings at the office. Their faces were a study in shock, then denial, then utter despair. My husband's bravado evaporated, replaced by a pathetic plea. Please, let's talk about this later. Not here. Oh, but here is precisely where we're talking about it, I said, my voice gaining strength, echoing through the stunned silence of the restaurant. Because here is where you chose to make a mockery of our lives, and here is where the consequences begin. I looked directly at my husband, my eyes unwavering. Consider our marriage over. And consider yourself financially accountable for every penny you've tried to hide, every asset you've attempted to divert. My lawyer will be in touch first thing tomorrow morning. And believe me, he's very good at his job. The ghost of his past started to cry, a pathetic whimper. You can't do this. You'll ruin us. You ruined yourselves, my unexpected ally stated, his voice devoid of emotion. And as for ruining you, my dear, that's already in progress. My legal team is already preparing divorce proceedings, citing infidelity and financial deception. You won't just lose me. You'll lose everything you've taken from me. The impact was immediate, devastating. My husband slumped in his chair, his face ashen, the picture of a man whose world had just imploded. The ghost of his past buried her face in her hands, her sobs echoing in the sudden, profound silence. The other diners, initially discreetly curious, were now openly staring, their whispers like a rising tide. I felt a surge of triumph, a powerful, cleansing wave of catharsis. It wasn't sweet, not exactly. It was raw, exhilarating justice. I had regained my space, my control, my respect, and I had done it without raising my voice, without resorting to violence, but with the cold, hard truth. As we turned to leave, leaving them in the wreckage of their betrayal, I felt lighter than I had in years. The battle was won. The war, perhaps, had just begun, but I was ready. The aftermath was messy, as all true reckonings are. There was no magical resolution, no sudden return to a state of blissful ignorance. The legal battles that followed were grueling, protracted, and emotionally draining. My husband, initially defiant, quickly crumbled under the weight of the evidence my unexpected ally and I had amassed. His attempts to deny, to gaslight, to minimize the situation were met with cold, hard facts. He lost more than just me. He lost his reputation, a significant portion of his assets, and the respect of those who once admired him. The ghost of his past fared no better, facing a similar fate at the hands of her equally determined husband. Their carefully constructed lives, built on a foundation of lies, imploded with a spectacular public crash. For me, the immediate relief was immense, a vast, open space replacing the suffocating weight of betrayal. But it wasn't a complete cure. The scars remained, subtle but present. There were days when a sudden memory, a familiar scent, or a song would bring a pang of sadness, a flicker of nostalgia for the life I thought I had. The trust, once so freely given, was now a precious commodity, to be earned slowly and carefully. I learned to live with a healthy skepticism, a quiet vigilance that hadn't been there before. My relationship with the unexpected ally evolved into a unique, unspoken bond. We weren't friends in the traditional sense, but fellow survivors of a shared battlefield. We occasionally exchanged emails, brief updates on the legal proceedings, a polite inquiry about each other's well-being. There was a mutual respect, a quiet understanding that transcended words. We had faced the darkness together and emerged, battered but whole. I rediscovered parts of myself I had long neglected. The career aspirations I had shelved, I dusted them off, pursued new opportunities, and found a profound sense of fulfillment in my own achievements. The hobbies I had abandoned, I picked them up again, finding joy in simple pleasures. I traveled, not to escape, but to explore, to see the world with new eyes, unburdened by the expectations of another. The feeling of being invisible, of being discarded, slowly faded, replaced by a fierce sense of self-worth. I no longer craved external validation. My strength came from within, from the knowledge that I had faced down a profound betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentically myself. There was a quiet pride in my resilience, in my ability to navigate the storm and find my own calm. My home, once a stage for his deception, became my sanctuary. I redecorated, purging it of memories that no longer served me, filling it with things that brought me joy and reflected my newfound independence. It was a physical manifestation of my emotional liberation. The silence in the house was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful, a space for reflection and growth. I learned that justice isn't always about retribution, but about reclaiming your narrative, your power. It's about refusing to be a victim, about taking control of your own destiny. The public spectacle at the resort had been a necessary catalyst, a dramatic declaration of independence. But the real victory was the quiet rebuilding of my life, piece by deliberate piece. Life wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still moments of doubt, of loneliness, of quiet reflection on the path I had walked. But these moments were no longer overwhelming. They were simply part of the human experience, acknowledged and then released. I had found a new equilibrium, a profound sense of peace that came from within, not from external circumstances. I was free, not just from a bad marriage, but from the emotional chains I had unknowingly worn for years. And as I looked out at the horizon, a new day dawning, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Some doors close, not to end your story, but to finally let you begin your own.